So, when we think about some tips to remember as you are working in anchor text or anchor experiences, one thing to keep in mind is when you're reading or selecting a text, you don't always have to read the book cover to cover. Oftentimes, children love to focus on a specific thing, whether it's a picture or a word or a concept that's happening as you're reading. And that's the time to stop and listen and to pause and just have this time to hear what the child's excited about or describing. They're likely relating to something that's coming from their own experience or reminding them of something. And this is a wonderful place to stop and to have dialogue, that back and forth conversation where you can be mapping language, you can be expanding vocabulary. And so, even if you choose maybe one or two pages, you had intended to read more of the book, but the conversation is really staying in one place around a concept or a theme, it's a great idea just to pause and focus there on the interest. And I would say the same for the anchor experience, that if a child, a young one in particular, is really focused on something, um, stop and be with the child in that moment and really listen to what they're saying, or watch them as they're intently observing and focused on something, and help them to build language, map vocabulary, and use that in a repetitive way. Most likely, children go back, as we know, to things that interest them over and over again. So that's language that you can use repetitively, which will help cement that concept and that idea and give them a word to use and to practice. Another thing to think about is drawing those connections. So they may have a question or a connection or an observation as you're reading that may lead to other words or other concepts or other books that they've read with you or by themselves. And this idea of co constructing meaning and co constructing understanding as you're engaged in these conversations around concepts that you're reading about or singing about or observing or doing in the moment. These are those rich opportunities where language is anchored and concepts are anchored, and vocabulary is mapped really intentionally. Another tip to consider is making sure to preview the book in home language. So if you have children um, who speak languages other than English, it's really important that you either have vocabulary listed and concepts listed in their home language. If you don't speak the language of the child, to make sure that you have access to those words, whether you're using an app to translate, or you have a staff member who speaks the language of the child, or even a parent volunteer can help you to fill in keywords so that children are conceptually understanding in their own language what the meaning is, and that way can make that transfer to English more successfully. Now let's move to another strategy in our instructional supports component, the intentional message.